is telling us as men to be common, to fall in line, to fall short of any visions or plans God has for us. But what about being uncommon? This is a movement of men seeking to build an eternal legacy. A journey of men on mission to rise above the common, to experience sustainable life change. This is Uncommon Disciple. Welcome to the Uncommon Disciple podcast. I'm Michael Bowen, here with Jared Gibson and our very special guest, Jimmy Graham. Jimmy spent more than 15 years in the U.S. Navy SEAL teams, earning the rank of Chief Petty Officer. He is currently the CEO of Able Shepherd and a director and lead instructor for Active Shooter Response Training Center in Centennial, Colorado. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thanks, brother.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's good. It's good having you here.
Good to be here.
It's good. So what's new?
Everything's new, man. It's a new year. We are heading into 22 with a full head of steam. Hearing a lot of people talking about the woe is me. What's this year going to hold? And we are more like times such as this. Let's get after it.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about Able Shepherd and what that entails.
Yeah, absolutely. So Able Shepherd, the true name of the company is Duty to Act LLC. And I don't know if you know this or not, that name came from a pastor that I had lunch with that dedicated my first daughter. That term is a legal term, and it came up of what is not law enforcement. That legal term, it usually means like, what is a police officer's duty to act? What's a firefighter's duty to act? If they're getting paid, they should put out that, your house it's on fire. So no, as a Christian man, what is my duty to act? Not legally, but ethically, to protect other people. So that launched an endeavor that I believe was a little premature. That was after the SEAL teams. I was still reservist. After my time with the CIA, I was actually still involved with that as a protective officer for GRS, Global Response Staff, and we launched Duty to Act, and said let's give this a go. And we jumped into it, and it didn't work. And at least in my perspective, it failed. About 7 years in, it's funny how that works out. About 7 years in, we got another opportunity to do our training at a live fire facility that they had moved out of. So it was an empty building that had a live fire range in it, and always thankful for that opportunity. And then to do the Active Shooter Response Training Center, that endeavor also didn't really take. Good idea on paper. You talk to people about it, and they like, if you build it, they just didn't come.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
And I had one more thing burning in my chest that I called Able Shepherd. So now we're Duty to Act, doing business as Able Shepherd. And it was my attempt at, this is how I believe people should be trained. This is how I enjoy teaching. And I'm not checking boxes. I'm training toward a capability, and it worked. So that's what we get to enjoy now, of being part of something that's actually growing.
Yeah, and I love the name Able Shepherd. It just has a great ring to it, and we had talked about this at one time. When I thought of shepherd, I was thinking of Psalm 23, where David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in his green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valleys, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me." When I think of a shepherd,
yeah.
People might think that the rod in the shepherd's hand is to beat the sheep that he's overseeing.
Yeah.
Right. But here David is telling us truth of God's word, that his rod and the staff actually comfort him, knowing that there's protection to keep and drive away the enemy, the wolves that want to attack. Right.
Absolutely.
So when I think of Able Shepherd and even Duty to Act, I feel that today, and you and I have had some off conversations about this, men just have not been fulfilling that role.
Yeah.
From a biblical standpoint.
Absolutely.
Right. So where do you see the crossover with what you do in Able Shepherd and into the spiritual world? Because I know that you disciple a lot of guys. And so guys listening in right now, they don't know your whole story, which we'll get into a little
Sure.
bit. I think I want to talk about what you just said. You failed on your first business venture.
Yeah.
And so what does it look like to overcome failure? Right. So we'll drive into that subject a little bit. But I want to talk about some parallels between what you do with Able Shepherd and how that crosses over into when you disciple guys.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The if I can touch on the shepherd thing, I heard something recently that really spoke to me. Obviously, anything that says shepherd catches my attention now. But I think it was Jack Hibbs talking about the difference between a sheep herder and a shepherd. A sheep herder might beat you into heading that direction where a shepherd would lead and then the sheep would follow, right? And I've seen that on adventures. Like, I'm not going to tell people what they're doing. They can do whatever they want. I'm going to go do this and you're invited. I'm going to go do this and you're invited. And before you know it, it's like a Rocky movie. You look back and the whole town's behind you, right?
Yes.
And really, all I did was, how would I appreciate being taught? What is a joy for me to teach? And in my calling, I believe, adding value to other men, literally pursuing their hearts for the kingdom that fills me, man. I love doing it. And when I got the opportunity to do it, the way I wanted to do it, it took, so I try to lead with that, 1 Peter 5:2-4, not to take anything away from the guys that teach the sheepdog mentality. It's just not scriptural. Because I was studying at Liberty University, sitting in like Tripoli, Libya, sitting in Beirut, Lebanon. And I checked scripture just to say, I'm feeling something. I don't know how you can have a conversation about sheep and then wolves and then sheepdog where something's missing, right? So how can we not talk about the shepherd? Then I dove into that word a little bit deeper, and it's all through the Bible, right? So there's examples of David being a shepherd, of the 23rd Psalm, of 1 Peter 5:2-4, of Psalm 78:72, all this, and that was it. And I still didn't fully understand it until this matured a little bit. For me, what that means is I've seen sheepdogs staring at the horizon and they look angry, right? I call it the mad grandpa, the guy staring at the horizon. He's mad. In his mind, he's protecting his children. What he doesn't realize, they're scared of him. Like in my family, there is one. And if you're honest, because I see the backstory when he's not there, they don't want him at Thanksgiving. Then maybe he's mad at me. He's got a bunch of guns. Maybe that energy will be turned to me. Maybe that strength will be turned on me. That's not a shepherd. So the shepherd to me is, yes, I will protect you. You need to know that. And I want you to glean strength from my strength. That'll never be directed at you, but you're not being attacked. So now I invest in your learning and your growth. And it's not just for kids. I thought maybe that there were some lessons I was doing for my son. And then I started meeting 50 and 60-year-old men saying, I don't know how to do what you just said. I don't know how to talk to another man, look him in the eye and say what you just said. I'm like, okay, let's get after it.
It's interesting because we're in this culture where people want us to conform to the world.
That's right.
Right. And the Bible tells us the exact opposite. But I heard you say this: a protector stands between a threat and those in their care.
That's right.
From a physical standpoint.
Yeah.
So now we think about that from a spiritual standpoint. If you're responsible for discipling men, just like what you said, just pouring some wisdom into their life, obviously using God's word as the basis, right? So a shepherd stands between the person that they're discipling and false truths that they're being fed. Right? Because the world will give them a lot of opinions. Here's how you should do life. Here's how you should raise your kids. But everything that we know about these things come from the Bible.
Yeah. And these things, the Bible teaches us, like, it's funny. I tell people regularly, we're not doing anything new. We're actually doing something quite old, so this thing is in us. You were built for this. And I say, if this is in your DNA, this protector that I'm seeing, I'm meeting this guy and I'm seeing somebody that cares about other people, and you would put yourself, in harm's way to protect these children. You're already a protector. I didn't make you that way. God did. But I can equip you because of the experiences he's blessed me with, right? At some point, there's guys in my peer group that are like these elite guys and all this stuff. And they're like, you train civilians, this kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah. They say, somebody breaks into my house, so I've got a new whatever. You're not home. You're gone all the time. You're like a Navy SEAL and you're deployed, 8 months out of the year or something like that. I'm relying on my neighbors. I'm relying on my peers. And if they don't know how to do this stuff, it's because maybe I had an ego and I was too cool to teach them. Mm-hmm. My family's less safe because I couldn't humble myself. Once I started doing that and training these people, the relationships, we talk a lot about relationships, unbelievable. Like when I wasn't able to pay my rent, he's always provided and we paid the rent. There was like that close calls, like the landlord, like, hey, can you hold off for a couple of days? That kind of thing. Yep. And little did I know that was the good stuff. But he's always provided, when we truly needed it. But I had to go through that. So when I say failure, perceived then as a failure, but I needed that. Now it's the gold.
Yeah. Interesting. And we had talked about this at one point as well, that in the very first book of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, right after creation, in the second chapter, God tells us that he took man and put him in the garden to tend and to keep it. And that Hebrew word for tend, which it literally means to dress, serve, and labor over it. And then the Hebrew word for keep is this word shamar, which means to guard, preserve, and protect. So we see at the very beginning of Scripture, God's command from man to tend for and to protect. And again, we see a lot of failures here in today's society because men are being demasculated, right? Like their masculinity is being sucked dry from them.
Yeah.
And so this is the fallout that we see, right? Where guys don't know how to talk to other men.
That's right.
They don't know how to speak to their wives. They'll hold back from making a decision for the fear of failing.
Yeah.
And so this carries over into every aspect of their life, not just their spiritual life, but their physical life.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you had said this, that a lot of people like to show off their cool weapons. And you kind of alluded to that before,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
They like to show off their cool weapons, but they don't have the heart to act.
Yeah.
Using those cool weapons.
That's right.
They want to show you all their cool gear. Hey, Jimmy, look at this new gun that I bought. Or look at this new piece of equipment. But that same person doesn't have the heart to act with the tools that he was given.
Yeah.
And so spiritually, we have God's word as our guiding force, as our weapon. Mm-hmm. But guys won't step up into that God-given role to exhort men and encourage men in their walk.
That's right.
Yeah.
I had so I mentor, as you mentioned, young men that are going in the military, not just the SEALs, like if you're going to serve this country, it's an honor for me to buy your lunch, and you can ask me whatever you want. Right. And we very little talk about the military. We talk about being a man. We talk about being a positive influence. We talk about, whatever I can pour into you, and I'm going to do it tactfully, and I'm not going to force it down your throat, but I've got an opportunity, and tactfully, I'm going to try to really hit you with the good stuff. If you understand the spiritual problems and anything comes at you, you'll apply that and see the attack for what it is. So one guy brought a notebook as like a little, little composition notebook, right? And he's got his pen, and we're talking, and he relaxes a little bit, sets it down. And before a little much like, yeah, I'm ready. And I've been doing, and it's just a little much. And that's cool because we've all been that guy, right? But I go, hey, you brought your notebook. Do you want to write something down real quick? And he goes, sure. And I said, write this down. Would you die for your country? And you can tell he's smiling. He's ready. He's thought about this answer. And then I said, not only country, but put your family, and then, for your community. Right. And he was like, just please ask me this. Please ask me this. I go, hold on a second. Second thought, cross out die and write live. Would you live for your country? I was like, it's so easy to animals die for their young. You're supposed to die for your young. You're supposed to die for this. You're supposed to, and all of us will die. But in reality, I don't know that you're living for your family. I don't know that you're living for this country. I don't know that you're living for, it's harder to actually make that commitment. And sometimes those people that love saying that, I'd die for this and I'd die for that. I'm like, how about you try living for this? And it is a challenge. You do it in a healthy way. They rise to that occasion. And I have told young men, it's like, if you're not willing to live for this country, then you shouldn't get an opportunity for the honor to die for this country. Not on that level. That's a big deal. And I hold that in high regard. Honor, integrity, accountability, those still mean something right here.
Yep.
And I think that there's many people like you guys that I meet, and they go, it means something here too. That don't conform to the world. They're trying to say that those words don't mean anything, and they lie. And then you repeat them, and now you're a liar. Or you correct them and say something true. I'm not going to argue with you, but this is a true statement. And then now you deal with that because I don't conform.
Yep. Now, was that always the case for you, Jimmy? Did you always live by this code, for example? And I'm saying that because I know that because I have a military background, and I went to SEAL training and failed, but there was a SEAL code that I would read, right? That I wanted to memorize while I was at Buds. And part of that code talks about some of the things that you just talked about, this honor and integrity, not quitting and not leaving, your brother behind. Yeah. Right. So some of the things that we learned in the military, I had none of that growing up. I had no spiritual foundation whatsoever. And so when I joined the military, all of these like honor and integrity and trustworthiness, these things were all new to me.
Yeah.
Right. But now there was a measurement to perform, right? There was a stress to perform to a worldly perspective. And so I would put a mask on, obviously, and be the best sailor that I could be, always, polished uniform and boots. But from a spiritual perspective, I carried some of those things over when I left the service. Yeah. Because I didn't get saved until I left the service. I got saved right at 9/11, 2001.
Wow.
I gave my heart to Christ, and I left the service in 98. But I remember as I was learning these biblical principles, I thought I had to perform to these things. But for you, you're speaking to them, kind of after the fact. So when did that become real for you? When did you start to integrate, not just the worldly principles, but the spiritual principles that we learn from the Bible and integrate them into your life?
Man, that's a great question. I got saved as maybe 10 years old, the old grandma praying for you and you going up and you're thinking, the deal. And
yes,
I questioned that for a long time after studying at Liberty University, getting back on that walk and saying that wasn't a real thing. I rethought that. I believe that my grandmother's prayers and me walking up was a real thing for a 10-year-old boy that knew enough to make a decision that he didn't understand the full, obviously, measure of that, because none of us do. But I dismissed it quickly as, probably just peer pressure or felt like to do. Then I look back on my experiences and there are literally times when I was here, not here, and people died, and I'm like, man, I think I truly believe now that God had a plan for me, obviously, but my grandmother's prayers helped shape that, and things started happening. It wasn't a flash of light. And some people remember the day and I don't. It was more these things burning in my chest. My buddy Gary, what's up, Gary Ellis? If he's watching, he's a great, just a great kind of, guy in the SEAL teams that we shared the same time frame. And I would ask him, I'm like, do you ever think this? And two lost guys bumping around next to a fire with way too many beers in them, trying to figure out life, and he's like, man, I think maybe you're looking for God. And respectfully, brother, we go into a Catholic church. He's like, come to church with me tomorrow. Let's figure this out. And we both left more confused. I'm like, I don't even know what the rules are. I don't even know what I'm doing here. And then the wafer thing, I don't even get this, whatever.
Yeah.
And he couldn't really explain it either, but there was a call, there was a tugging. And then I walked into a church that it's funny because it kind of freaked me out because it was kind of it's called Spring Branch Church in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I walk in and everybody was kind of too perfect and the music was too good. And it was like a rock concert. And I'm just waiting for the lighters to come out. I'm like, the quality is like, they're freaking like, they should be in Nashville making millions on country singer, but she's singing about Jesus or whatever. And it kind of was just weird for me because I was kind of a small church guy or whatever, back when I was a kid. And something happened where the guy, it was Michael Simone, was preaching. And those experiences people talk about where you're the only dude in there?
Yeah. He's
like, I feel like I'm the only guy in there and he's talking to me. And like that list that me and Gary kind of formed, at least in our conversations, it's like he was checking them off systematically. And I came back and it quite frankly hasn't stopped. Like that thing to where it's like, on the way here for whatever reason, I'm coming here and I'm just like, man, this is amazing that I get to do this life. Like I get to, God is like, not for you. It was weird. I'm at the stoplight getting off on Wolfensberger. And I was like, I thank God that he didn't answer my prayers because I didn't even know what to pray for. And what it wasn't enough. And if he would have granted those things, I never would be doing this because I never had the guts, I guess, or even the knowledge or experience to pray for what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that's, I want to talk a little bit about that, Jimmy, because I have some backstory to your life leading into Colorado.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for guys that are listening. You had a very successful career, not only in the Navy and SEAL teams, but when you left the service, you did a lot of contracting. You were responsible for training high-level people all over the world, traveled like a rock star, most likely, but slept in bad places as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was there was a dichotomy there that you were walking. But when you left the service, you found yourself, and this actually made me very angry. We had JP Donnell on our first episode, and I remember hearing JP's testimony. He was telling me that, the military, they say after you go through all the SEAL training qualifications, you're the $1 million man, right? Mm-hmm. The government's invested almost $1 million in your capabilities. And JP was literally doing odd jobs, like delivering pizza, doing odd job construction work. And your life was similar to that. So I speak to that a little bit. You leave the service, your contracting job.
Yep.
And now you find yourself in civilian life. And there was a reason why you did that. I'd like you to talk about what led you to that decision to leave, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, talk about some of the difficulties that you faced when you left the service, which kind of led you into where you are today.
Yeah.
And you said God closed a lot of doors on you leading up to where you're at today.
That's right.
And then when Jared and I came out to see you, was it last week? You're like, I could never have dreamed up what God has provided for us. So speak to that a little bit. When you left contracting and that decision point. for you?
Yeah, it's like leaving the SEAL team surprised me because I tell people this: I've had two of the greatest jobs in the world for a single guy with no kids. Once you have kids and you get married, it loses its luster because there's another thing calling you, right?
Yep.
So even before I wasn't married when I left the SEAL teams when I left active duty. I stayed reserves for a while because I needed to leave my toe in. I'd say it was just too good of a deal. It's too good of a fit. So to leave something like that when it's not your calling is easy, but to leave when you're good at it. And I don't boast saying I was good at stuff, but I got the awards and I got the medals and I got this and my peers respected me and I respected them. So that's what I mean by I was good at it and I enjoyed it. And I thought it was but something was calling me out of that. It just didn't feel like a destination. It felt like a stepping stone, right? So then I got out of there and I took it just popped up that Blackwater USA, before nobody knew the name of this. They just knew the SEAL teams leased a place and they would go train there, new company. They just started contracting and I did a contract job, one job for 2 months with Blackwater USA. And that's the one you can read about. And you can read about, in the book called Blackwater, the Fallujah incident where the 4 contractors were killed. I was on that team, but not on that run, obviously, because I wouldn't be sitting here. But I was on the phone trying to find them from the base in Kuwait, and then there's Iraq and Baghdad and Kuwait, trying to find those guys when we're looking at the news and there's trucks on fire and they look a lot like the ones we just sent out. So that's trying to figure all that out and saw that work. The way that particular company handled that, I was like, we're done here. The camaraderie that I kind of took for granted and the brotherhood of that team, it just wasn't there. This was a messy way to do that. And I felt like I had sold my soul for money. Made a little cash as a young man, but man, I would have given it all back. It just wasn't good. So I headed off to Montana to just, go, probably one of the best things that I ever did was go, trying to find Jimmy Graham and just get myself centered up in the mountains.
What year was this?
This was 2004.
2004.
2004. Yep.
This is the turning point for you.
Yeah. This was a big deal. This is me going out to Montana and just saying, many job offers like, hey, we're pleased with what you did. And you took one for the team. You're just a good team player and all that stuff. And we're going to go to Africa and we're going to manage team management. And I'm like, I'll be in Montana. Like we had a deal. And the way that you handled that's not the way I work. So I'm going to pick up my dog and I'm going to drive my pickup truck to Montana for a month. And that's where I'll be.
Sounds like an old country song.
It was cool. I think a lot of guys, the more guys I talk to, go through a phase of you're like, you know what, I'm going to get a cat. This is literally my pay. I had some cash in my pocket, right? Yeah. I go out there, I got no ties to anything really. And I'm going to go out there and I talked to the Forest Service. I checked out the school in Bozeman and in Missoula. I went and checked out a bunch of properties. I'm going to build a cabin. I'm going to come finish school. Just leave me alone. Yeah. I'm just going to be that weird dude talking to trees out there, man, that, I've earned it. And then, and quickly realized that, that guy doesn't move the needle. There's a problem here. And and if you got the heart to address it, then you're not going to be hiding in the woods somewhere.
Yeah. Now you weren't married at this point.
I was not.
Yeah.
Nope. Ended up getting a job, come back in training, SEALs on the same base that I was stationed on as a civilian for a contract company called CQD.
Got it.
Amazing, genius of a tactician. Dwayne Dieter was a part of that and poured into the SEAL teams. That'll be probably a book someday, I hope, or a movie, because there's true life heroes in this world. Yep. And he's one of them, and it's an unsung.
So you leave contracting.
I do, yep.
And you go to, now you're going back to kind of a contracting job, but here civilian, in the States.
Yep, training,
civilian.
Yep.
And what does that look like for you?
It's another stepping stone, of trying to figure out who you're going to be. And then it's funny because it's like, it would be a cheesy movie of some guys approach me and say like, hey, can we talk to you outside? And when 3 SEALs say, can I talk to you outside? You got to check your back. You're waiting for the rigor's tape to come out and you're like, yeah, let's go.
It's like the mafia.
What's going on?
Let's take a drive to the woods.
What they were saying is, we love your passion, the way you teach, and would you consider coming work for the agency? Right. So you got to meet this guy. And it was funny. It was like a strip mall Chinese food place. And we're sitting there and he goes, would you come work for us? I said, what does that look like? And he's like, you live wherever you want. Montana starts going off in my head. You live wherever you want. We'll fly you in. You train for 3.5 weeks. We'll fly you back. About once a year, you deploy for us. Keep your finger on the pulse and go do the job as a bodyguard, so to speak, for the CIA. And I said, that sounds about my speed. So met Rachel. Re-met Rachel. We dated right before I went into the Navy. Lost track of her for about 7-8 years, and then ran back into her when I was back in Kansas City visiting my grandpa's birthday. And I fell in love. Got married, and then I asked her if she would consider marrying me in Montana for destination wedding.
Now, was she saved at that point? Was she walking with the Lord?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yep. And she was just, it's amazing what, I don't know how many, it would be funny to see the ratios of the men that get saved because there's an attractive woman that says, I'm going to raise my family such and such. So you roll your eyes,
Let's
you walk
go to
into
church.
a church and all of a sudden they snatches you right out of that pew and you're like, wow, he's talking to me.
Yeah.
So I'd already had a little bit of that taste, like I said, that calling in that church in Virginia Beach. But then when she moved out and we got married, that became our church. So we started going there. And like I said, now it's getting thick, man. I'm that guy that preaches accountability, but doesn't live it. And that wants something bigger than myself, but won't live it, that kind of thing. So at some point that catches up to you and you're a hypocrite in your own mind.
Yep.
And I think I shared this with you was somewhere along the way, I was convicted and I said, there's people on this planet that if you said, do you know Jimmy Graham? They go, yeah, I know that guy. Maybe I punched him out in a bar one night or I slept with such and such, or I did whatever. Mm-hmm. And man, that hurts, but there's not much I can do with that now because some of those guys aren't around anymore. Some of these people aren't alive anymore. Mm-hmm. Some I'll never see again, but it bothers me that they have a poor image of that. And I said, I can't do anything about the past. I'm going to have to rely on a little grace,
sure,
but I can do something about the future. So everybody I meet for the rest of my life will be better. Everybody. And it might be this much or it might be this much, but they will be better if I have anything to say about it. And I do.
Jared and I have talked about this an awful lot because, even in our walk with Christ, there's been people that I've wronged. I haven't walked the walk, like I should have been.
Yeah.
And it was part of my spiritual growth. I was very immature when I first got saved and I was still doing a lot of stupid things and making people angry. And, now, I'm trying to push a spiritual agenda on people that are looking at me from my past life. But, it's one of those things, I don't want to say that haunts me because it doesn't, but I just have to trust that God will deal with, with that.
That's right.
I've gone back and tried to make amends or, tried to, ask for forgiveness, but you have to keep doing what God's called you to do and keep pressing forward. Jared, you had a similar thing happen to you, right? Hey, gentlemen, we just wanted to take a pause in this podcast. And again, thank you for listening in. And we wanted to share some resources and companies that we hope that you'll find will add value to you and into your world. And one of these companies that we'd like to tell you about is Origin Maine. And if you've never heard of Origin Maine, their products are made right here in America, and their mission is to bring American manufacturing back to the U.S. We love what this company stands for. If you have not heard of Origin Maine, go over to their website and check them out, originmaine.com. And I've been there. I've been to their facility, and I've seen what they're doing with some of the towns in Maine, revitalizing communities and just making a positive difference in their area. So what we also love about them is also that their products are superior. They're very high quality, and literally we're fueled by Jocko Discipline Go, which is one of their products. We carry all of their supplement lines here at our Jiu Jitsu Academy, and we see that it makes a difference in the people that use their products. I personally use it. I use Joint Warfare because I'm an old guy, and their krill oil, and then especially during this time of season, I use their Cold War as well. And they just came out with a new pre-workout that's pretty awesome. And so we know that you won't be disappointed. They also have a full line of jiu-jitsu gis and apparel. I've got a pair of Origin boots that are just indestructible. I love them, and they're comfortable. And again, they're made right here in America. And so as a listener and supporter of this podcast, you get a special 10% discount off of any product sold at originmaine.com. So head over to originmaine.com, and that is ORIGINMAINE.com, and enter Uncommon10 to receive 10% off of all of your purchases. That's Uncommon10. Thank you, and we'll get back to the episode.
I've been there before, of not walking the walk, but, talking it. I was involved in a lot of ministry in my early 20s and like doing things with college groups and things like that. But, I would be up there and saying things and talking to people. I even volunteered with like junior high, and like I'd be like preaching those things and preaching to like everyone that came through the college group. But then, I would maybe on the weekend go get drunk or, go out and go do something stupid. And that was actually impacting my ability to actually be effective. And then eventually, like everything, just like some of what I was doing ended up getting caught by some people, and it really hurt a lot of people, and it really blew up what I was trying to do. And so for me, I mean, that was like one of those big changes. I'm like, man, I gotta get my act together, because I can't be talking to people and saying like, God loves you and like, you need to be a man, you need to go out there, you need to be a good husband. And then I'm like, woo, blowing it up at home.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I used to, I think about what Jimmy was saying earlier about just speaking to guys, telling them, it's just speaking wisdom into their life, but like, again, early on in my Christian walk, I would be thinking about the passage that Jesus says, take the plank out of your own eye before you go to your brother. Right. And I was like, oh crap, I have like 3 planks coming through one eyeball. Right. And so I was spiritually disabled.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way that I could describe it, but as I walked and Jared and I, as we disciple guys, we talk about the fact that guys should be living by a spiritual code.
Yeah.
Right. Again, kind of going back to the code that SEALs live by, and I outlined it in my book, but one of them is take responsibility for your actions and the actions of your teammates, right? Learning what it means to take responsibility. What does that look like? Well, it looks like I'm not blaming people for all of my problems, for my upbringing, for whatever that looks like, for guys. Guys get stuck in these spiritual trenches and they can't dig themselves out because of, all of the sin that's in their life.
Yeah.
But that's where guys that are walking the spiritual walk, mature guys, can come in and speak words of wisdom, words of exhortation, words of encouragement. And that's where I feel the church is lacking today. At least in the circles that, Jared and I have walked, we've discipled a bunch of guys here. And even, before moving here, I think I told you the Bible study that we did in Minnesota, there was like 500 guys meeting at 23 locations around the Twin Cities. Right. And so I would encounter guys all the time, but, guys would just be like, I want to tell them what to do, but I could only give them, biblical wisdom. So it's like, you can train someone so much, but it's taking that next step of action, right? For guys to launch out and actually start practicing the spiritual principles that they learn. So going back to your story, again, it's kind of like this overcoming setbacks and challenges, right? Because one of the SEAL codes, right, is not quitting, right? It says ready to lead, ready to follow, and never quitting. That's part of the code, right? Yeah. And so I used to hear a lot in the military, if you want to fail, you want to fail forward, right? You never want to fail backwards and keep taking steps back. So if you experience some failure in your life, that you're constantly pressing forward. And that's even true from a spiritual standpoint. A lot of guys get stuck in sin and they keep digging themselves deeper into sin versus going, okay, I had a setback. Now I need to step forward. We have a guy recently that just he's got some addiction issues and he had a relapse, and he's digging himself deeper into that sin versus saying, okay, man, I had a setback.
It's like spiritual quicksand.
Spiritual quicksand.
Yeah.
Just like that. But,
right.
But Jimmy, you talked to me about this before, that you go to Montana, right? And you're living this life. And for those that are listening, you wouldn't know this story, but Jimmy was actually in Benghazi, right? And you had I would call it a divine intervention, right? That took you out of there for a little bit, and then you came back to it. So pick it up from there, right? So Benghazi, because that was a big episode, I think a big eye-opening experience that kind of might have led you to some decisions.
So I was a lead instructor. So there was 2 guys that could teach pretty much everything to those guys going over there. Primary job was teaching, but then I would also deploy. In 2012, I left the schoolhouse to deploy for the year, which roughly means 2 months on, 2 months off to Libya. Obviously, there was an attack on September 11th, 2012. It was between my second and third deployment. Now, right before that, this is a thing that I carried for quite a while, is that my in between my second and third child, my wife and I experienced a miscarriage. I was overseas, and she called to tell me. She was crying, and we talked about it. And it's one of those, do you want me to come home? There's not much you can do, and it's early on, and just to see those excuses.
How late was she in the pregnancy?
It was very early, and I don't remember exactly, but it was like a first trimester. But it's like that, having had 2 children, this joy that you see in a pregnant woman of knowing there's life inside her. It's just this proud glow, and then it's not. You know what I mean? And man, if I had do-overs in life, you don't in their understanding in that job, they'll send another guy out, go home. But we, to be honest, we needed the money. We weren't responsible. We making a lot of money. We just weren't responsible with it. And we were kind of in the rut, like we were in the trap, right in the middle of it. So we convinced each other that it would be best for me to stay out there and finish that deal, right? But during that, it was they asked for me to extend, and I'm always the guy, the first guy, out of his seat, the last guy, that kind of thing. It's like, hey man, you need me, I'm here. The ambassador's going to be visiting. You need me, whatever. But that time, no. Like that time, there was a wound going on, and I'm like, I need to go home and be with my family. So I didn't stay. And as history taught us, that that there is as a movie taught us, actually.
So you flew back from Libya to Montana?
I went back. No, at that point we're here.
Okay.
So we're back here. So I'm back here in Castle Rock.
Yep.
And I remember it's like 6 something in the morning. I'm heading to Denver for business. I'm training myself up in business and just trying to get everything I can. I'm going to a SCORE, SCORE,
yep,
to Denver, and I get a text, and it's from a guy that you wouldn't know, but is a national hero that we'll never know his name. Call sign was Wyatt. We recently lost him to a heart attack, but he was standing on the porch. And the scene depicted in the movie Zero Dark 30, when the suicide bomber blew a bunch of guys up, he was wounded, crawled around, put tourniquets on, saved lives and all that stuff.
He was an agency guy?
He was an agency, yep. And I was working with him over there, and he said, have you seen the news? That's all the text said. I'm like, 6 in the morning, good trusted buddy from overseas says, have you seen the news? So I pull it up, and that's how I learned about the attack in Benghazi. I was the team lead 3 weeks ago in Benghazi, Libya, and now I'm seeing fire. I'm seeing Ambassador Stevens' face. I'm seeing all that. Mm. So that's how I learned about that. So I did go back for one more tour, 2 months, and picked up and
this was the aftermath.
This is the aftermath, right?
Sure.
Went back and had seen too many times, including Tyrone Woods. It was the same thing. It was just another reminder of most guys in that arena. There's a saying. This one, maybe one more, and then I'm going to do that thing that's calling me. This one, maybe some guys do it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, right?
Did you ever read Adam Brown's book, Fearless?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah. Yep.
Kind of the same exact story,
right?
Like, oh, this is going to be my last deployment, and
you can't. It's not. We got something shiny. So what was the shiny thing they threw at me was Serbia, not Serbia. Serbia was that's not right. It starts with an S. I get they all blend together, but I'd been to Serbia, but it was starting to Syria. It started to clack off, and I was like, ooh. They're like, hey man, I think we're gonna say, ooh, it's a new thing.
So they put the little lure, the Syria lure.
But I think that because of this unfortunate event, that with that happened, this wound, I was like, no, we're doing this.
Yeah.
There's somebody's got to put a line in the sand, and this is it. So I'm gonna go do that thing. And I talked to Rachel, and we liquidated stuff, and we just did some what I thought was unwise decisions. Those things that you're not supposed to touch for the rest of your life, those investments.
Yes.
I prayed about it, and I felt that I was supposed to liquidate all that stuff and go for it, right? And then it didn't go, right? So for men in general, but especially like a Navy SEAL, whatever, alpha male, whatever you want to call that, that failure, again, failing forward, I didn't know this was going to be. Now, fast forward, this is the best stuff, but I didn't know that at the time. So it devastated me. And I tell people, everybody's like, man, you got so much energy and passion and all that stuff. I'm like, Jimmy Graham ran out of all that stuff on the floor right down the street from here. And we're not far from it. It's a couple blocks away, actually, off Park Street. That's where that guy ran out of steam.
So you liquidated everything to invest in a startup.
Yep.
Right? And it didn't go as planned.
That's right. I believe it was too early. It was to bridge a gap between the training that I saw in security guards and law enforcement and what I was doing. I was very fortunate to see that level of efficiency.
Now, let me ask you this, because this is interesting. So you have I'd say there was a good setback in Benghazi. Probably had some survivor guilt. Is that true?
Yeah.
Right. So you're going through that. Rachel has the miscarriage. So you're now shouldering that.
Yeah.
And now you're making decisions with your life savings, basically, to go and start off on a new venture, and it doesn't go well for you.
Right.
Now, I think it's important for listeners to hear now from a spiritual perspective, right? As a Christian man, because we've, if you've been walking with the Lord for any amount of time, you've read the book of Job, right? You just see how you see God allows things into our life, and we don't know the end story. And that's part of the frustration sometimes in your spiritual walk. You don't know what God's doing. So you want to take control and do it yourself and fix things instead of just taking some time, detach from the situation, and then, looking out, getting some mentors or, talking to some people. You experience this failure now in business.
Yeah.
Now, now it starts to get real for you because you blow your life savings. You're now struggling with, 3, I would say, life-changing events, right? You're kind of shouldering these things and navigating life. Now it's survivor mode, I would suspect, right? So what does that look like for you?
It looks like you telling your wife, if anybody who's ever held their wife in their arms, talking to God saying, I prayed about this. Like I feel in my heart. And if you weren't telling me to do this, I don't know what your voice here sounds like, right? So you can reflect on it now and say, obviously that's God at work and that's how he works, but it doesn't seem like that at the time. Yeah. It's your question, everything you believe, and you're on your face in a building like this, but nobody's coming in, right? So, and you're watching the numbers and they're just sinking. Yep. And you go, I can probably pay the rent and nothing else and just until maybe the end of the year. And then the end of the year comes and you gotta give up a lease and say, we thought we could do better than this. Apologize, guy lets me out of the lease. Yeah. I remember I paid for some of the debt that I owed for improvements. So brother, I got nothing. And we thought this was going to go. And I paid for it with a tactical shotgun. I was like, you
told me you went to your gear locker, right? And you were
no. This is, and then so then
that's
I go, I get a job. I go to the church and I'm leading men's groups again. Everybody's like, yeah, this guy Navy SEAL, CIA, you got it all figured out, all this other stuff. What they don't know is I got zero on my bank account, and I'm in the church because I need to be. And I start a men's group because I'm getting more out of it. And I'm teaching what is called TS4G, Tangible Skills for Guys. I'm teaching welding. I'm teaching this and that, and all this other stuff. And I'm working for what is today's dollars less than minimum wage as a veteran Navy SEAL that was a CIA bodyguard. And I'm taking out the trash at the church. Yeah. And I'm setting up the chairs and tearing them down because I just needed to be in the building. Right. And that was down the road this way. And my brother-in-law offered, he said, hey, there's a good paying job at the railroad and it's local. So I pursued that, a construction job, heavy equipment construction job with BNSF Railroad. But little did I know that, it's the bait and switch, man. As soon as they hire you, that whole crew is out in Nebraska all summer. So you're gone again. But now I could be in, wherever.
Nebraska's a little different than Montana or Castle Rock.
I could be in Benghazi making 3 times this, or I could be sitting here working, but it did. It was,
now, how many times did that cross your mind? Because as a man, right, we want to provide for our families, right? And Jared's got great stories as it relates to just, these failing forward stories. I've experienced it myself, starting businesses that failed, right? But at this point, you're thinking, oh, great, man, I can go make $200,000 in 6 months or whatever, right? And now I'm working probably, for an hourly wage for a big railroad, which is hard work in Nebraska, right? Which is tough weather. Yeah. And now, that's a real lure, right? That's not like one of these, it could get a little better. It's like, I could get away from all of this, do what I love, and collect a big paycheck, right? So you had to juggle that.
It really is. And I think that accountability is starting to set in. And it's like, but you promised you wouldn't. So that's a powerful thing. Like when you the Dave Ramsey, when you cut up the credit cards.
Now you promised Rachel that you wouldn't. Yeah. And did you make
a
commitment to the Lord?
We said, I'm done with this. I'm not going to be that dad. I'm not going to be that husband. And I thank God, I never want to diminish the military and the guys that do serve for a full career and the guys that are serving the agency and all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate that. I'm the biggest patriot you'll meet because I know what they're missing. I know what they sacrifice because they don't get to do birthdays. I get to take my kids to school in the morning. I get to spend the morning with my little baby daughter when my wife has something, because now I didn't used to get that, but I get to do that. And some of those guys do not. So that's part of that sacrifice. So to see that and to go through that, a family saw what I was doing through relationship again. And they said, we have an investment company here. It's a fundraising company that literally is selling like baked goods to schools to make money for field trips and stuff like that, but they go, you're good with people. And they, to be good with having conversations, professional conversations with women teachers all day, all that stuff. And it was outside sales. If you can go make this money, then some of it will be yours. But you'll be here. I promise you'll be in this town and you'll be driving around doing this stuff. Very, very little travel, all that stuff. And you'll be here raising your family. And they go, we know this isn't your calling. We know this isn't your season. This is so kind of beneath you, not really, but they just said, because I'm humbled at this time. And I'll do whatever I can. And I remember, this is why I'm in the church, because I made a promise to God. I made a promise to God and to Rachel. She says, I see these numbers, and they're at zero, right? And I said, I will take the next thing that God provides, the next job. Because I'd passed on a couple things, right? Because you're waiting for the whatever. Take the next thing, and I'm in there teaching that class. And my buddy Jeff Holcomb, what's up, Jeff? He's checking it out. He's a good guy. And he's on the other side of the country now, but I'll never forget this conversation. We're talking about my class that I'm teaching at the church. So Jeff's assistant comes up and talks and says, "Do you want me to post this job?" And then walks away, and we just continue our conversation. And I can almost feel like God's like, I literally felt like looking up and going, "Really? Like, what are we?"
Yeah.
I go, "What job are you talking about?" He goes, "Oh no, it's just we're looking for another facilities guy. Just to take out the trash, set up the rooms, tear them down, all that stuff."
I'll take the next job.
I know. That's what I hear. It's like, you promise the next thing that comes, because
Yeah.
Rachel's watched this go down. That whole women have that security gland, and it's going off and saying, danger, danger. It's supposed to be the provider, like all of this stuff. And I say, really? And he goes, "Yeah, somebody might be interested." I go, "Yeah, me." And he goes, "If you're serious, I'll hire you right now." Like, what? So and I explained it. I said,
Now listen, was there any ego and the humility? Was that all firing?
all of that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's like, are you kidding me? Like, really? I'm going to be telling you, like, whatever. But truly, the reason I was teaching is because something said, you need to be here more. You need to be in this building. That's why I'm teaching this men's group. And I'm feeling like this is the kind of the safe place for me to lick my wounds, so to speak,
Yep.
So I take it. Then that leads to the railroad. Then that leads to while at the church, met this family that owns this business locally. And they said, this position will at least keep you here. It's going to make some decent money, and you're going to be doing this, but we know it's for a season. And I said, yeah. And they said, "We'd like to take you and your wife out to lunch." And they presented to both of us. Good Christian family. And again, a safe place to say, okay, I can humble myself and do pretty much anything. By the way, the entire time following my passion. Like I remember like coming home from the railroad covered just nasty from working, like really working. And it's funny because people are like, "Oh yeah, well got to see what hard work tastes like." I'm like, brother, this is the SEAL teams. Like I was in the SEAL teams. It's not like I don't know how to work hard.
Yeah.
Like, that's like the hardest job I've ever had. But this is different because it's not your calling and it's hard work. When you love doing something.
This was
it's
like
hard.
New guy work for you?
This was like, I mean, this is like, have you ever dug, I didn't know you could wear out a shovel. I didn't know that. I thought you buy a shovel for life.
Yeah.
You guys wear shovels out. They're shoveling rock and it's down to nothing and they get a new shovel. Like unless you if you've dug a chest deep hole in the rock that they call ballast,
Yep.
as soon as you shovel out of it, it fills up again. So how long does that take? Whatever, but it's just work and it's heavy equipment. So I love that stuff. But it just reminded me, like literally now the gold of this is when I see a train go by, I'm like, roger that. These guys are out there working it and I appreciate them. It's just not my deal, right? So they offer me this deal and I'm doing this. And at night I'm coming home and taking all this nasty clothes off. Rachel's like, "Don't even bring that in the house. Leave it in the garage." And I change my clothes real quick and go train some police officers. Or I go train, doing this stuff. So still pursuing it.
Yes.
And I tell young people now, it's like, yeah, pursue your dream, but have a job doing it. You know what I mean? So don't quit your job and just go for it. Like whatever, let's God lead you that way. But there's things you can do to prep yourself for that. So yeah, that was, again, holding your wife while she's crying and you're talking to God and doing all this and saying, but he always provided, it was the, and the story you're talking about is I'm asked to come pray at the Veterans Day. It's a Veterans Day. It's in November. I'm standing there like, "Jimmy Graham, we have a local Navy SEAL. Can you?" So I'm standing up there feeling like everybody thinks that this is this guy or whatever.
This was the story of you going to your gearbox to sell some gear.
I can't. I know in my mind, walking on stage, I don't have the gas to get north of I-70 on Denver, like in my truck.
To get to work.
Yeah, well, I've already cut up my credit cards and I said I won't do that again. And now there's no cash, there's no money, there's no way that this car won't make it that far, right? I'm the guy, if you've ever driven using your tachometer, not your speedometer, so the RPMs would stay low so you can make it through the week, what I'm talking about, right? And especially in this terrain in the mountains, I'm in a 4-banger Toyota pickup on the right lane pissing people off because they're like, "Man," whatever. And I know I can't make it. So I'm praying with my daughter, it's snowing, we're like that. And after work, I got to walk off the stage and call my boss and say, I can't come to work, whatever. So as I walk off, I pray for our nation's veterans and our active duty and all that stuff. And I come off the stage and I look at my phone and a guy had retired. And my boss said, his name was Greg. And he said, "Hey, so-and-so retired. We're going to take him to lunch. Go and take the rest of the day off." And I'm just like, "Oh, thank you, Jesus." And I go down in my basement and I go through and I remember exactly what it was. It was a Surefire shotgun, an 870 foregrip with a flashlight. And it was a 226 flashlight, the old school ones, whatever. Yeah. And they were still brand new. And I walked into a pawn shop and he gave me enough for 2 tanks of gas and it got us through the week.
Yeah.
And that's just a low point that I'll never forget.
Did you go back and get it after you got money?
No. I was like, I didn't even look back, brother. I was like, this is something's going to live in a box forever.
Yes.
But it was just enough to get us through that week to a paycheck. And then like I said, to hear somebody talk about that as this is precious gold, like right now,
Yes.
It doesn't feel like it when you're doing it, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Like those lessons they have to burn in.
Well, that's what I loved when we talked, because, and I have stories similar and Jared has stories similar, but we look back on these things and say, I wouldn't trade any of those hard times ever, because I know that that's where God wanted to lead me to where I'm at today. So, the biblical underlying principle here is that God honored your obedience.
Yeah.
Right? You committed to him and to Rachel, to your family, that you wouldn't. And it was hard. Yeah. And you had to humble yourself. And every amount of ego that was running through your body is saying, I don't want to do this. Yeah. But you knew it's exactly what you wanted to do. Yeah. And I can just tell the listeners this, Jared and I have both been up to Jimmy's facility, and it's amazing. State-of-the-art training facility. His team is highly professional, and you told me you couldn't have dreamed up what God has provided in that arena, and it just encourages me. When I hear that story, and I think I'm going to put a choo-choo train whistle on my ringtone. Yeah, every time something gets hard, and it's interesting because you remember JP when we had him on, Jared. He talked about, I get to do this. Yeah. It's interesting just saying that to yourself. I get to do this. Right. Right. Honey, can you go pick up the kids? Well, I got all this stuff. No, I get to go pick them up. Sure, I'll go pick them up. Yeah. Hey, honey, can you do the dishes? Well, I worked all day. No, I get to do the dishes. Yeah, right. I'm here. I'm home. I get to do it. And just changing the messaging that that we, because that's what we do as men, right? We put up our defense real quick. We want to fight against everything that's coming at us, especially if it's from our wives. But when you just change it to, I get to do this. That's right. I get to get up in the morning and go disciple men, or show up at a Bible study, or, go to a job that might be a temporary launch point for where God wants me. Yeah. Right. But I get to do this is a great message, right? To say to ourselves. So as we start wrapping up, Jimmy, we do this thing called final thoughts. Mm-hmm. And guys listening that might be experiencing some hardships right now, right? What are some things that you could say? I mean, obviously, and it's the last thing that guys typically want to hear, but we always go to God's word for our answers, right? Well, all things work together for good for those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose, right? But we know that truth, but sometimes just hearing a testimonial from another guy that say, hey, here's some wisdom that I gained from overcoming some of these setbacks and failures. What are some final thoughts that you can give guys that are listening that might be experiencing, hey, they're in a job that they might not want to be in right now, or they're riding this lane of, hey, God's calling me in the full-time ministry, but I've got to provide for my family, and that's not going to do it. So what are some things that you could feed to some guys that might be listening right now in that regard?
I think just came in a conversation recently. There's the short game and the long game. Like right now, everybody is so I want it and I want it now, but there's truly those good things of like what God is doing, that long game that he has for you. The thing that I was thanking God for on the way here, it's like, I feel somebody told me, you're chosen. They told me that, and I go, I didn't expect this answer. I feel chosen. Like when you feel chosen, the day is different, right? Those hard things, like God, he disciplines his children, right? That was discipline. That was, I built this thing in you, that thing in your chest, that fire that burns, I think sometimes brighter than some of those around me. And then you see another kindred spirit and you relate to that. It's like that injustice in me that burns. I see it in my daughter. He placed it there and it didn't feel comfortable at the time. When you're forging steel, it's a good analogy. You're forging steel. It takes heat and pressure. You think the steel likes that, but that's how you harden battle steel. Right? That's how you make that beautiful sword that you can slam into whatever. It must go through that process. Because to opt out on that process, you won't be ready for what God has intended for you. So him telling me now, it's totally different. Hindsight's 20/20. He's like, the thing you're praying for is not good enough. Right? Not for you. You're my son. You have that thing in you that is going to press harder than others. But trust me to get you there. I will not disappoint you. I will not lead you in this direction or that. I've got a special thing for you, and it's going to be harder now. And it's almost like he's smiling tongue in cheek going, just wait. I can't wait till you see this. And that's if you're in that spot right now and you think about it as an investment, a long-term investment, a good investment, like this is the good stuff. And he cares enough about me to put me through this. It changes the perspective.
Yeah.
There's a battle coming and you need to train for it. And I'm training you now. I don't like to train. That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that instant gratification mentality it's running rampant in society today. And I think at times, even if I'm honest, I'm guilty of it from time to time.
Yeah.
I want it now. But it's interesting, that instant gratification and looking toward the long game.
Yeah.
Do you realize it now that when you look back at some of the vocational work that you did before God brought you to where you're at right now?
Yeah.
Was he still working some things out in your heart at that point? As
still working out now, brother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, he's always working things out. But were there some key things that you think, if you look at from when you first tried to start the business that didn't go well to, launching off, doing what you're doing now, in that transition, he was working things out in your heart, wasn't he?
Yeah. And I think so things that pop up in my mind, because I think when it's one thing to look back in your life and see what God has done. It's another thing to see what he's doing right now. You know what I mean? Like on the drive here, this honor, this pride overwhelms me of like I was just talking about, it's like, I'm coming here and I'm like, this is it. This is the thing, I'm going to go be on but his podcast that's Advancing the Kingdom. I'm seeing all this standing up and not glory. I'm not looking to hold glory that belongs to God, but I get to touch it. He lets me touch it and I give it back. And it's funny on the way here, but I've got a chiropractor over in Highlands Ranch and a guy entrusted me with this story. And he was telling me about this. And he said, I did this thing and man, I don't want to share too much because it was an emotional thing or whatever, but it's where you ask this gentleman was talking about this kind of heroic thing that he did. And he actually honored God. They asked him, why'd you say that to that little girl about God? And he said it, and then they were trying to make fun of him, but I'm like, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. God, glory will eat us alive and it'll destroy you. But you do get to touch glory, hand it back to God and keep some of that honor.
Yeah.
And I think that's what guys forget.
It's kind of like when Moses said, let me see you. And he says, I'll let you see my glory, right?
Yeah.
Just going by. So, man, Jimmy, it's been so good having you on.
Thanks, brother.
And I know this won't be the last time because you're local. And
right.
So I look forward to having you back on and hearing more. And I know that we've talked about doing some men's events here in the future. But I just want to thank you for taking the time to come out and talk to us.
Yeah, very
and
well.
Encourage men that'll be listening in on this podcast. And if one guy gets encouraged by it, then I feel like that we've done our job.
Amen.